All right. Thank you, Nicholas. And good evening to everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's webinar. We're glad you could join us for this session, which is part of, as Nicholas had said, our Indo-Pacific Foreign Policy and Defense series. This series highlights the essential work the U.S. is doing across the Indo-Pacific and is dedicated, and the dedicated professionals making it happen. So tonight we'll explore how U.S. agencies collaborate through the U.S. whole of government approach using that DIME framework that Nicholas mentioned, the diplomatic, information, military, and economic framework. It's a team effort that strengthens partnerships, tackles challenges, and advances shared goals in the region. We also hope tonight gives you valuable insights into careers like foreign service officers, foreign area officers, and other key roles that help shape U.S. engagement abroad. These careers aren't just jobs, they're about making a real difference on the global stage. So, thanks again for being with us, and let's dive in by introducing our incredible panelists. We're fortunate to have an exceptional panel of experts with deep experience in the Indo-Pacific region. So let me introduce them. Our first panelist is Mr. Pete Larson, a retired U.S. Air Force C-130 pilot and foreign area officer located in the Washington, D.C. area. Our second panelist is Ms. Shannon Dorsey, a U.S. State Department Foreign Service officer currently on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And our final panelist is Ms. Aileen Nandi, a U.S. Commerce Department Foreign Commercial Service officer currently located in Singapore. Each panelist will give a 15-minute presentation highlighting key aspects of their career journeys, including the selection process, training, and assignments related to the Indo-Pacific region. They'll also share how interagency collaboration has been crucial in advancing the U.S. whole of government approach while working with regional partners. Now, before I hand it over to our first panelist, Pete Larson, allow me to provide a bit more background of his pedigree. Pete is the former director for South Asia Regional Affairs at the White House National Security Council. Other notable postings include those at the U.S. Mission in Israel, as a military advisor at the State Department, and as a faculty instructor at the National War College. Pete is also the current president of the Foreign Area Officer Association. So with that, I'm going to now pass it to Pete. Over to you, Pete.
Hey, thanks, Matt. First of all, thanks to the East-West Center for pulling this together. It's always fun and an honor to talk about these types of things. When you presented this topic, I jumped right in because I think it's a great topic to talk about. If it's some way of signaling to folks that are on the cusp of jumping in and doing this type of work and they're not doing it yet, then that's great too. So why don't I just start off explaining what a FAO is, what a foreign area officer is, and then we'll kind of go from there. A foreign area officer is a joint job, typically. So all branches of service have foreign area officers. The Army has led the way. Matt, our moderator here, is an Army foreign area officer, has led the way for 70 to 75 years doing this job. FAOs over the course of the past few decades have been involved in about every conflict and really peace, and they do both. So there's a role for both. When I say that the Army kind of ruled, they kind of set the pathway for a foreign area officer, That really is the truth. And it wasn't until about 2005 that the rest of the services got their act together and followed suit. Um, Other branches had FAOs, but it was very ad hoc at best. And then, going back in time to 2005, that was right at at the heat of Iraq and Afghanistan, and a couple things happened at that time. One of them was Congress. The war in Iraq wasn't really going swimmingly, and Congress commissioned a study to be done with a bipartisan group led by James Baker and Lee Hamilton, and in coordination with USIP. It's a fascinating, it truly is a fascinating report. You can download the report. It's called the Iraq Study Group Report, The Way Forward. And it's not just an incredible report to read because of Iraq. It's really a tremendously, it's valuable to, no matter what the theater is. You can definitely take some of the lessons out of this and apply it to the Indo-Pacific theater. And the host of experts that were involved in this is incredible. When you look at the end of it, you'll see tons and tons of well-known names that participated in this study group over the course of 2006. So they're picking apart what kind of went wrong, and in that, one of the things that they noted and is that the U.S. personnel, and it wasn't just the military, it wasn't just DoD, was not really ready for the challenge that they were going to face in engaging with partners at that time. It just so happened to be the partner, our Iraqi partners. Interesting. I'm looking at the report right now. I just want to read something for everyone as they're trying to note one of these issues. Our embassy of 1,000 has 33 Arabic speakers, just 6 of whom are at the level of fluency. In a conflict that demands effective and efficient communication with Iraqis, we are often at a disadvantage. So, and this is just one. I mean, the report's incredible to pick up on these things, and you can apply that to any place in the world, and we'd be about the same. So, that report carried a lot of weight at that time with Secretary Rumsfeld, and he basically told in a directive, a DoD directive, for the other services to follow suit and do what the Army does to make FAOs, so that we have folks that that can understand the region, the language, the culture, and most importantly, the goal of that is to build relationships with the folks you need to build relationships with for national security purposes. So that led, whether the other services liked it or not, for them to build a program, and they quickly did. And that's when I got into it. Is the Air Force got told, you will do what the Army is doing, and you will develop FAOs. And what I mean by that is develop FAOs. Well, a FAO has to have a regional degree in the country or region that they're going to be assigned to. So a broad international relations degree is not good enough for this qualification. It has to be in a region. So very specific on the history, the culture, the politics, all those types of things. You have to learn a language, and you're supposed to go, at the interagency level, they want you to be a 3 across the board, but as a minimum at a 2 across the board before you're FAO. And then the third part of the training program is that you have to do some in-country training. And what that looked like for me was to live in different countries at the time in the Middle East, and learn more language and engage with the embassies, learn how the embassies run, and that type of thing. So that's kind of the 3 pillars of FAO training. And I'll just say that the services to this day always look at that as this major investment that they have to put into building one of these folks, pull them out of a C-130 or whatever else that they desperately need that person doing also, and committing that, hey, we're really going to do this. We're really going to give this person a language, and we're really going to make sure they understand these things, and then go out and work in embassies. And there's always a challenge that I would say, oh, by the way, you end up as you're doing your career, we'll get to the interagency parts, making these tremendous relationships with your interagency colleagues. And you spend way more time with State Department for the rest of your career than you do with your own service. And that's great. And, so I have tons of friends that are, my Christmas cards go out more to State Department friends than Air Force friends. And that's just kind of how it works. But it's a great relationship. It's a great working relationship in the interagency. But I will say, going back to the challenges with the force, and with State Department, it's a given of what the role is. It's not a given for a foreign area officer. There's always this challenge with the services of whether this is worth it. Is this investment that we're putting into this worth it? And that's the reason I love going back to this James Baker report, because it shows right here exactly why it's worth it, and the problems they ran into by not having the folks that understood the region and the culture, and quite frankly, were able to build the relationships that they needed to build. So I was, the Air Force said, hey, put in an application if you want to do this. I did it. And at that time, I already had German under my belt from a previous assignment where I needed to know that language. And I thought that I was going to be on the mark plots of European towns for the rest of my career, and life was going to be great. And the list comes out, and it says Pete Larson, Arabic, Middle East, North Africa. And I'm reading that going, oh, there must be a mistake. I'm supposed to be going to Europe. But anyway, so it ended up being wonderful, and loved my career, loved every single FAO assignment that I did. I was an attaché in Tel Aviv. I was at the State Department on the team there in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. Did a building partnership capacity mission for Africa, which was amazing. Joint staff job doing that team there, and then went up to the White House on the National Security Council as the director for South Asia. Really fun jobs. Every one of those has just been an extremely rewarding job. And I could tell you that you always feel like when you're doing these types of jobs, that you're kind of doing the national level, strategic level. You're at that kind of level of the decision process. And that's rewarding in itself. I mean, it really is when you see the things that you and your colleagues from state and you're working together on, and you're really making a difference. And so that's where I would start, just kind of the career-wise, Matt, and why the FAO job is important. But going back to it, there's always this challenge. And I'll tell you where the latest challenge is, and I've heard it from at least on the Air Force side, is that they're going, hey, okay, we love the FAO thing. It's incredibly important, but do we really need to invest in the language piece of this thing and teach these folks languages? Of course, I mean, you probably understand where I come from, where I come in on that, in my opinion. And quite frankly, I don't understand. You would be incomplete at your job if you cannot have a relationship where you're able to convey what you need to convey in their language. And you'll always hear stories where everything reverts back to English, and when you're out there doing these jobs, and that may be the case, but if you're really going to break through on a relationship, it can't just be one-sided. You need to show that you're giving as much into it as they are, in trying to understand their language. And to think of a FAO out there that isn't trying to learn the language of the place you're going, it just doesn't sound like it would be a good move, because all your attaches from the other countries certainly are learning the other languages. And do you really want the American there as the one that decided that it wasn't a good idea to learn the language? So that's where I'd start, Matt, is just trying to, convey what a FAO does. The roles, I also, I kind of divide up the training into three pillars. I kind of divide the roles up into three pillars as well. So I think there's generally three types of jobs for FAOs. Some of them stay in the same pillar, if you will, their entire career, and that's fine. Some cross over, some do all three. And generally speaking, that's security cooperation. So that's helping the partner country get the things they need to fulfill their national security roles. And then there's the attaché side of the house, and that's making sure that our country has the pulse of what's going on in a partner country or any country for that matter, the best we can out there. So, national security decisions can be made in an informed way back home. And then lastly is kind of the policy pillar, if you will. And these are the FAO jobs where you're supporting a combatant command like Indo-PACOM, and or maybe you're at the White House on the NSC or the Pentagon or at State Department, those types of jobs. So I would say generally those are the three types of jobs that you go to. And I'll leave it there for now, Matt.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Pete. That was great. Really appreciate that. And I just wrote down a couple of notes from your remarks. One thing that stood out was when you said building relationships cannot be one-sided. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a fantastic words to live by for us FAOs across the Joint Force. And I really appreciate those comments. They resonate well with me as an Army FAO. So we'll come back to you for questions, but really appreciate that, Pete. Thank you. Um, Now I'd like to provide more background on our second panelist, Shannon Dorsey. Shannon possesses over 20 years of experience as a State Department Foreign Service officer. She is a diplomatic fellow with the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. Shannon is also the former cultural affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. Other notable postings include those as a foreign service officer in Swaziland, Uganda, Vietnam, and Laos, as a congressional fellow, and 3 postings at the State Department headquarters in D.C. Welcome, Shannon, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Matt, for that introduction. I'm just going to share a PowerPoint presentation real quick, mostly just to keep me on track so I don't sort of forget where I am. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great. Terrific. Thank you for that. So I'll start off a little bit just talking in general about State Department and Foreign Service officer positions, and then go into a little bit of the work that I did primarily in my most recent post in Tokyo, because I think it really illustrates well sort of working together in the interagency to achieve some policy objectives. So with that, I'll go ahead and start. So again, Shannon Dorsey, Senior Foreign Service. I'm very delighted to be in Honolulu this year, serving as a diplomatic fellow here at the East-West Center. It's been a fantastic opportunity, not only get to learn about what the center does in the region, but also what some of the other organizations based here in Honolulu are able to do as well. And just really understanding the strategic importance of Hawaii and the role that it's playing in the Indo-Pacific region. So for foreign service officers, we're broken up into what we called cones. There's 5 cones: political, economic, consular, which I've spelled wrong, so my apologies for that, public diplomacy, and management. I'm a public diplomacy officer and won't argue about which cone is the best because lots of people have their own opinions. But in general, when you start off with the department, your first two assignments are directed and you are having to do certain things to be able to get tenured, which happens usually at your third tour. Part of that tenuring process is serving as a consular officer because there is a requirement there. It is also part of the tenuring process to move off of language training. So usually there's opportunity to learn another language if you don't already have one. For myself, my first two tours were Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam and then also in Swaziland. They were fantastic opportunities for me in both countries, very different from each other, but really set my career off on a great trajectory. I would say, though, in general, before I wrap up on this particular part, that for folks who are really interested in joining the Foreign Service, the State Department has a great resource online. It's careers.state.gov. I encourage you to check that out at your convenience. And I think it's also important to remember that the State Department is not the only agency that sends folks overseas as Foreign Service officers. I know I have a colleague online today who's representing Commerce, but USAID and also US Department of Agriculture send Foreign Service officers overseas as well, doing incredible work. So good to always think about those opportunities as well. So with that, I'm going to switch over to my next slide. And the reason I kept this up, even though after I made it, it wasn't very impressive, was because while I think I've served overseas in a lot of different and interesting places, when I look at the map, I actually see that I haven't really served in that many places at all. The world is big and there are lots of things to explore out there. And I think that's part of the interest in the job. And certainly what I have taken away from my career so far is not only have I been able to have a somewhat of a regional focus in terms of Southeast Asia, but just thinking, what I want to do in the future and where I would like for my career to go. So again, when I look at the map, I'm like, oh, there's not very many blue colored countries there. But Matt did a great job introducing my background, but I've served in Vietnam, in Swaziland, now called Eswatini, for those of you who are tracking. I was in Washington on the Cambodia desk and have worked in Laos and Uganda, back in Washington as well, most recently in Tokyo, and we'll be going on to Vietnam, this time to Hanoi, when I finish up here in Honolulu. I have studied, but I will not say I'm a good speaker of any of these languages, but I've studied Vietnamese, Lao, and Japanese. And to Pete's point, I do think, even though I am not the best language learner, it is really important to keep that as part of our preparation in our overseas posts. I realize for many people looking at ways to, reduce budgets and things like that, language might be an obvious choice, especially with AI and other online tools. But for developing those relationships that you mentioned, absolutely important. So with that, I will move on and I'll talk a little bit about the work specifically that public diplomacy officers do, primarily overseas. But happy in the questions to talk a little bit about what happens on the DC side as well. But just to note that traditionally public diplomacy officers have fallen into two camps. There's information officers and cultural affairs officers. We are trying to move away from those two distinctions and just be public diplomacy officers overseas. The department is slow to change, so I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think, one of the things that brings us together, especially overseas, is the department really focuses its energies on audiences. So overseas, we break our audiences up into two big camps. There's still a lot of crossover between the two, but in general, we have our emerging voices and we have our established opinion leaders. Emerging voices are, young people, change makers, people maybe new to the US, in this case, the US-Japan relationship. That's a pretty broad umbrella, but it's basically those people who are up and coming, leaders of the next generation types of folks. Established opinion leaders, on the other hand, are those who are already working in the country and have their own networks that you can use as sort of a force multiplier to be able to go on to talk to their own networks about US policy issues. So you could imagine they might be professors or journalists or editors of newspapers. And our program designs are really meant to focus in on one of those two types of audiences. And one of the things that, we try to do, at least on the cultural affairs side, with our public engagement opportunities, is to really use those opportunities to advance our foreign policy on any one of a number of issues. And so one of the things that I really love to talk about is a program that we hosted at the ambassador's residence in Tokyo. Probably now it's been a little over a year. And there's a great institution working out of LA called the Japanese American National Museum. And their primary focus is to bring attention to sort of what happened during and what has happened since to those Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. And they do amazing like public outreach activities. They have a museum itself where they have exhibits going on all the time. And so we were able to work with them to bring a selection of their collection over to the ambassador's residence and to set it up sort of like a small gallery space and invite lots of, just going back to my former terminology, lots of established opinion leader types to be able then to share their networks with some of the information that the museum has to share. And, one of the things that we were able to do is really highlight the importance of accountability. Our ambassador himself said it really best, the internment of Japanese Americans was a shameful period in American history. And this exhibition allows us to confront our past face to face and to learn from it. And for audiences in Japan who aren't even always aware of what happened during World War II, this was a real eye opener. And it was a very a terrific opportunity to be able to pull this together, and one that I'm not sure I'll be able to repeat in my career. But moving on from that, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that foreign service officers do when we're overseas. Some of this is particular to public diplomacy officers, but some of it is just sort of writ large. And, Pete also mentioned, and what I was going to start off with was building relationships, both within the embassy and without, and how key that can be to the work that you want to do. But, we also are advising the ambassador on, public opinion and sentiment that's happening in the country. We're lucky on the public diplomacy front that usually we have some funds that we're able to grant out to organizations. So we're able to actually implement some of the projects that we have in mind. We work with local media. We are also reaching out to members of the media and journalists to find out, what they're hearing from their contacts and what information we could share with them. But for the purposes of this conversation this evening, I thought it would be best to talk about visits. So when you're overseas at an embassy like Tokyo, you are receiving a lot of visitors and you're also sending a lot of visitors. And while the visits themselves can take some time and take some management and, have to put everything into a place, what they really are is an opportunity to develop what we call sort of a list of deliverables. And then those deliverables are then sort of what is announced during the visit that then sort of keeps you on the track and sort of highlights sort of where your efforts will be over the next, few months or 6 months or a year. Public diplomacy usually plays a large part in putting together sort of what those deliverables may be, but every agency does. And at a post like, Tokyo, we have NASA represented, Commerce represented, we have a defense attaché, we have lots of different agencies who are there. We're all feeding into this central effort on sort of developing and then delivering on some of these initiatives. And so where that all sort of coalesces is in what comes out is usually the joint leader statement or a fact sheet or a combination of the two of those things. And, you know, leading into this is really an effort that is usually initiated by the White House and the NSC, but they're coordinating with Maine State, with embassies overseas, with other departments and agencies on this list of initiatives that we'd like to announce. You know, sometimes this can be contentious, I won't lie, you know, not everybody agrees on the best course of action. Sometimes it's a matter of how things are going to be funded and who's going to pay for what. But in the ideal world, these are really opportunities that we all use to be able to come together and really map out those things that we want to do. I should also mention that because these are joint statements, you know, it's really important that we're getting buy-in from our local government. So in this case, the government of Japan, because this is being announced by their government as well. So we're all working together sort of on the same end. And so for this past visit that had the picture of President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida, which is one of my favorite photos, that was from Prime Minister Kishida, the former Prime Minister, when he went to Washington in April of this past year on a state visit. It was really an official visit with a state dinner, but we just call it a state visit for short. And we were able to announce several really exciting initiatives during that visit. One that I wanted to highlight today because it really was in partnership with colleagues at Commerce and also our Economic Bureau and our Economic Section at Post on the development of a university partnership in AI. And so we announced that there was more than $100 million in funding from the private sector that was going to advance AI research partnership between leading American and Japanese universities. We were also able to announce, and again, because we had great cooperation from so many different people, the creation of a $12 million education endowment fund, also fully funded by the private sector to support student exchanges between the US and Japan. And so, you know, these were joint announcements. So it took a little bit of time to get our government of Japan partners on board with all of this. But in the end, we were all able to do that. And in fact, Commerce hosted a signing session for those AI university partnerships. And we were awfully thrilled that they volunteered to do that. But these university partnerships that we were able to announce have a longer history than that. So it was actually the third in a series of strategic university partnerships that I had worked on with Ambassador Emmanuel during my time in Japan. So in May 2022, going back to the importance of a visit, President Biden visited Tokyo and had a meeting with, again, former Prime Minister Kishida at the time, and that they made a commitment during that meeting to advance US-Japan science and tech cooperation. So in response to that sort of overall mandate, the ambassador initiated a series of university partnerships supported by the private sector in several key areas that are really key to the economic security of both of our countries. So AI was one, the one that was announced in April, but also quantum computing and semiconductor engineering. And so then fast forward to May of 2023, when we had the G7 Leaders Summit in Hiroshima, the US and Japan were able to come together and to announce two other partnerships in quantum and semiconductor engineering. And in that case, there was a little over $200 million from the private sector, like IBM, Google, and Micron, that invested in those university partnerships. So altogether, that's been more than $300 million raised by the private sector to support these strategic university partnerships that really, I think, just go to highlight the importance of the interagency, because as just a PD officer working in a PD section, wouldn't be possible without the ambassador's leadership and then also the support of, especially in this case, commerce. We were also able at the time to announce several MOUs. So during my time there, we worked on 2 MOUs. One was in higher education cooperation that was signed by Secretary Blinken, as is seen on the screen, and Japan's Minister of Education. And then this past year, we were able to sign a separate MOU to counter foreign malign information, which is one of the very first of these types of MOUs to be signed between the US and a country in the Indo-Pacific region. So just so you all don't think it's just all work all the time, we do fun things in the Cultural Affairs Department. And in this case, it's been baseball. So in 2022, Japan celebrated its 150th anniversary of baseball coming to Japan. And since then, given the fact that Shohei Ohtani might be like the most popular person in both countries, we had the Baseball Hall of Fame come out and make a big announcement about an exhibit they're planning for 2025 that will focus on Japanese baseball, not only Japanese baseball in the way it is played, but then also Japanese players in the US. And then I just was looking online just last month, and we had A-Rod there meeting with some very excited young Japanese baseball fans. And so baseball, baseball, baseball all the time. So with that, I will stop talking, but happy to answer any questions. And thanks again for the opportunity to talk about some of these very exciting things we were able to do at Embassy Tokyo. Thanks, Matt.
Shannon, that was great. When you mentioned baseball, that brought me back to my time in Japan almost a decade ago, going to a few Japanese baseball games. It's nothing like a baseball game in the States, that's for sure. A lot of fun, a lot of fun. But also you mentioned the S&T partnerships, quantum AI semiconductors. And that was, as I understood, a partnership between university, private sector, and sort of government-enabled, government-facilitated,
Exactly.
and working with the interagency there. So that's really fantastic. We did something very similar in Australia when I worked in the Security Cooperation Office there. Really appreciate all of this. I will let you know that I used to serve in Vietnam as well.
Oh, great.
And I worked closely with the public diplomacy section. In fact, while I was there, I led resume writing workshops for the Vietnamese who wanted to get some, I guess, tips from an Army captain at the time on how to write a resume. It was fun. We had a
Great.
blast. But thank you, Shannon, and we will have some questions at the end.
Terrific. Thanks, Matt.
So now I'd like to move to our final panelist, Aileen Nandi. Aileen is a Department of Commerce Foreign Commercial Service Officer with over 20 years of practitioner experience. She serves as the Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs at the U.S. Mission to ASEAN. Other notable postings include those as a Foreign Commercial Service Officer in Mexico, El Salvador, and 3 postings in India, culminating as the Counselor for Commercial Affairs in India. Aileen is also the former Executive Director for Asia at the Commerce Department headquarters in DC. So we are very thankful for her to be here today. And with that, Aileen, I will pass it to you. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I know time is tight. I think we have an hour for this session. So I'll make some quick remarks to allow some time for Q&A at the end. So I am a Foreign Service Officer with the Commerce Department. And as was mentioned before, different agencies different departments also have foreign affairs agencies. Essentially, I have two bosses or many bosses when I'm overseas, because I directly report to Commerce, but under the Chief of Mission Authority at the embassy, I also report to the ambassador. So it keeps things fun and exciting, having several bosses. Sometimes those bosses have different views on things. And so that's why what my colleague said about having good networks, good relationships, and strong communication. I think that's imperative no matter what kind of career you go into. I think if you can be a strong communicator and a strong build strong relationships, that is what sets people apart. It's not necessarily the intellectual acumen, but you have to have good interpersonal skills as well. So for Commerce, to get in, there's a test, and unlike State Department, you need to have we come in at the mid-level, or you have to have relevant experience in order to pass the test. And so relevant experience means you can work for a company, you can work for another government agency, as I did. I joined from the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. You can there's a number of ways you can have relevant experience, but there's a written test and then an all-day oral assessment. I took the state oral assessment the week before I took the Commerce oral assessment many years ago. That's just the way it fell, and I thought the Commerce assessment was much harder. I did better on that one. I got caught up off the list faster, but it was really, really tough, and I felt really drained at the end of the day. But I also thought, wow, that was super cool. I loved all those exercises, and I hope I can get to do that. So here I am. What we do is we help U.S. companies succeed overseas, and so we are very much about supporting economic security, and helping promote U.S. exports overseas. That can be anything from a transaction. So sometimes a company has something stuck in customs and they can't get it resolved unless they pay a ridiculous bribe. So they call us and then we get it out. They release the shipment after a call from the embassy. So that is a transactional thing. We do a lot of setting up meetings for U.S. companies with potential end users, distributors, channel partners, whatever it is they're looking for. Because small and medium companies don't have government affairs people, and they need this type of assistance. We also work on transformational things and commercial diplomacy. So, in India, one example was I worked a lot with the medical device industry because India had price controls and U.S. companies could not sell their products because India said you can only sell at this certain price. So I would work with the government saying your consumers, your patients are not able to get the best products because you're looking at price rather than quality. So have many of those discussions. I will say interagency collaboration is the best way and the only way to succeed. However, as I mentioned, sometimes there's differing viewpoints, and I'll give one example. So our mission is to promote U.S. exports. So everything, it's about promoting U.S. jobs, promoting the health of the U.S. economy. And I know sometimes my defense colleagues, to sell for U.S. defense companies overseas, they have offset requirements. Many countries say, okay, we'll buy like the fighter jets or whatever, but you need to manufacture 60% of it here, or whatever the formula is. So that's the only way for U.S. companies to succeed. They have to get partnerships and build some manufacturing capabilities on the ground, work with some of the leading companies, and do that. So we all understand that, but sometimes in terms of writing talking points for the ambassador or other people, I've had discussions with defense colleagues because they would say, highlight the U.S. company's investment in the country. And I would say, no, that's actually, one could argue that's taking jobs away from the U.S. So sometimes we have back and forth about the talking points and how that's communicated. And you also, in terms of public affairs, you communicate different things to different audiences. So most of our communication is with U.S. companies, trying to get them to export, trying to get them to look at the market. but I have a different message when I'm talking to companies here. I'm currently based in Singapore, or if I'm talking to countries in the ASEAN region, it's a different message. So again, communication, strong relationships, good networks. Those are the three things, no matter what career path you choose. Really focus on these areas, and that will hold you in good stead. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Aileen. It's fascinating. I didn't even know about that you had to go through an exam with the Commerce Department, much like the State Department colleagues. So that's very interesting. We do just an admin note. We have billed 1.5 hours for this presentation. So we'll be able to answer a lot of questions here as we move to the Q&A. So definitely, if you haven't submitted a question yet for our audience out there, please use that chat box. But thank you again, Aileen, for your comments. And thank you to all of our panelists for those insightful presentations. That wraps up the prepared remarks, and now we're going to transition to our Q&A portion of our webinar. And as a reminder, as I just mentioned, use that chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions if you haven't already. I'll begin with some pre-submitted questions, and then we'll move to questions from the audience as time permits. So my first question is for Pete, relating to your experience in national security and military affairs. Given your experience in both military service and high-level policymaking at the National Security Council, how does the interagency decision-making process shape U.S. defense and security strategies in the Indo-Pacific? And perhaps you could share an example where military expertise influenced a broader policy outcome. So I will now pause there and pass it to Pete. Thank you.
Sure thing, Matt. The first thing I'll say with the National Security Council, for anyone in the audience that might not understand what it does, it's pretty much a coordination body. It came under the Truman administration and evolved since then, and has gotten larger and larger over the years. And really, your job as per statute is to coordinate on behalf of the president. So it's a little bit different. We're all from these different agencies. We come together, form this team, and you take on one of these roles. But once you're there, where I'll give you, you're literally working for the president's. You're working for the country, but you're working for that. You're working for whoever the president is at the time, and every NSC is different depending on the president. And I'll even tell you, I suspect that the first Trump administration and the next Trump administration, NSC will be a little bit different. They can shape them, form them, use them however they want. There's plenty of presidents that in history that have gone with more of the kitchen cabinet model to inform their major national security decisions. In other words, their most trusted, they have the most trusted people around them for those most senior level decisions to be made by the president. And then there's some presidents that prefer more of a process. President Obama was well known that to use that method with his NSC, where it's a very structured process to drive up to courses of action. So with that, I'll say when it comes to taking those roles on the National Security Council, whether you're coming from state or commerce or what have you, you're taking it on. And one of the interesting things about taking on those roles is once you get up there, if you're doing it for a regional bureau, which I did, and you get put in the hot seat and you're the coordinator for that set of countries, no longer are you there just representing your agency or department that you come from. At that point, you may have obviously the most expertise in your department because you came from that department, but all departments are equal at that point, and you're not there to represent your department. And it's just how it works. And depending on what issue you're working, you in fact may be spending a lot more time on the phone with or in meetings with individuals, your counterparts from departments that you're not from, because that's just what is required at the time for the policy you're working. So from that aspect, for folks that do go up to NSC, it's pretty interesting because you quickly have to learn, if you don't know already, what the other departments are doing and how they contribute to national security. I will say that your role and different directors, when they get up there, see this a little differently. I took the approach, at least I tried to, that I'm there to coordinate national security policy. In other words, I'm not there to necessarily make national security policy. And that's the way I approach the job every single day. So what that means is, you call in all the departments and agencies when you're the relevant ones to the issue you're trying to work that day, and you have a discussion. And going back to my colleagues that are on the call with me, there are arguments between, by the nature that we have different mandates in the different departments and agencies, there's at certain times you're going to have conflicts between the different departments and agencies, how they're looking at a particular issue. And your job at the White House level is to ensure that the departments and agencies are not working at cross purposes with one another. And that can happen. You can be working for a certain country and one department and agency prefers going to that dime construct that we started off with today. They may want to use carrots, if you will, to get to a certain point with what they're working on. And then another department wants to use sticks. So carrots and sticks for different policy outcomes, but maybe to the person that you're working with in that country, the actual partner, they're just seeing this weird thing come at them, weird approach come at them because they're seeing both carrots and sticks hitting them at the same time. So your job is to make sure that policy is well coordinated. And that you're thinking through it, and that you have one person up there that at least is accounting for what all the different departments and agencies are doing, noticing if they're working at cross purposes with each other. So that's kind of your daily job. And then on top of it, if you do get the time, you actually are trying to think forward, and you are trying to think, an actual strategy with lines of effort and trying to get to a certain point. And sometimes those are dictated for you through the national security strategy, and sometimes they're not. And really, when it comes down to it, you're looking for opportunities to pursue the U.S. national interest, whether through all the dime that we talked about when we first started. So it's not just military. If you're a FAO sitting up in that job, you're also, you learn a lot about the economics of these countries whether you come from an economics background or not, and you learn the whole bit because that's what you have to do every single day.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Pete. It's very, very insightful and I feel a lot a lot of gratitude just to hear your feedback on your experience on the National Security Council, because that's like, it doesn't get much higher than that, and it's like some would argue a pinnacle FAO assignment, working directly for the president. So thank you for sharing your experience there, and giving us a little bit behind the curtain on how you worked with the full interagency to achieve the president's strategic objectives. Now I'm going to move to a question for Shannon relating to public diplomacy and cultural affairs. So public diplomacy is often often involves collaboration with various U.S. agencies and local partners. So Shannon, can you describe a time when the interagency cooperation helped expand the reach or impact of a cultural diplomacy program in the Indo-Pacific, whether it be a program that you did in Tokyo or a program that you helped facilitate when you worked the Cambodia desk back here at Maine State. Would love to hear from you on that. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Matt. Apologize if you can hear some construction noise. There's a building going up right next door. So I think I'll talk a little bit about our English language programs that we had while I was in Japan. In Japan, generally, there's sort of a low proficiency level of English just across the country. It is a mandatory requirement that children learn it in elementary school, but I think that it's an opportunity for, I don't think people studying English get an opportunity to speak it very much. So it's book learning and test taking. And so I think when people move into their professional lives, there's a lack there. And so, because there is such a demand for English language teaching across the country, we really had to be strategic about sort of what we could do with our limited resources. And that's where our interagency partners really came into play. So for one program that we were able to do, we worked actually with our diplomatic security, but also with the FBI to create sort of a tailored curriculum for Japanese police officers that was for a workshop that was actually being run through the National Police Academy. These are police who ultimately would go overseas to work at their embassies, at Japanese embassies overseas. So English language was really essential for them, and really in the best interest of the US too, that they had those skills. And so, so we were able to implement, I think it was a 2-month English language program for those police officers. And then moving down to Okinawa, they actually worked with folks from, there's several military bases in Okinawa with many, many service folks there who were very interested in volunteering and giving back to their local communities. And so the consulate there organizes a bi-weekly English language conversation series. So it's open to the Japanese public. And then there's volunteer service members coming in from some of the bases to have conversations. And it could be on anything from what did you have for dinner last night to something a little bit deeper in terms of, what's happening in the region. And then moving from there and broadening this out a little bit, we worked on an English language teacher training exercise with English language teachers that had a trilateral focus. So, one of the things we haven't talked about today is sort of the multilateral efforts that can go into policymaking. And during my time in Tokyo, President Biden hosted the leaders of Japan and South Korea at Camp David for a summit in August of 2023. Understanding then how important it is that trilateral relationship be developed, not only at the executive level, but really throughout societies. Bringing the English language teachers was a great way to sort of institutionalize that relationship. And so those teachers came together. I think it was ultimately for a month-long program with several months lead up to be able to exchange ideas and techniques for effective English language in their classroom. And then, just because we're not finished yet, especially on the military side, we were in the process of, and it still continues today, to developing a tailored course for members of the Japanese Self-Defense Force. And the idea of providing them with some English language skills and capabilities is, and then when they engaged in their multilateral military exercises, primarily with English being the primary language, they would be able to participate much more meaningfully and get a little bit more out of those exercises. So we're listening to our interagency partners on the country team and understanding from them sort of what they're seeing in terms of strategic needs for English language, and then using our resources that the department provides to be able to really implement those at a strategic level. But thanks, Matt, for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. That was really great. And just hearing all of the different English language programs that we offer to the host nation from to facilitate various interagency opportunities, I think is fantastic. And I just learned a whole lot in that short remarks. So thank you. I'm going to now have a question for Aileen relating to commerce and economic diplomacy. And the question is, economic diplomacy requires balancing commercial goals with national security interests. How do you collaborate with other agencies such as the State Department or Defense to advance U.S. trade and economic objectives while ensuring regional stability is maintained in the Indo-Pacific? And Aileen, I think you answered a little bit of this, talking about your time in India. But if you can you expand upon that a bit? Thank you.
Sure. So I think the most traditional way we over the years have worked with our defense colleagues would be on the military sales, advocacy for military sales. And most of the time, our defense colleagues have the stronger relationships with the decision makers. So we work very, very closely on that. But because economic security is national security, we've been deepening our relationships. We have a commercial officer embedded at Indo-Pacom, for example, in Honolulu. Former Admiral Aquilino joined Secretary Raimundo on the Presidential Trade and Investment Mission to the Philippines. We had a tabletop exercise with General Aquilino and his team. We've also done tabletop exercises with SOCOM. So there's a recognition that economic interests really do play into security. So at very senior levels and working levels, we're deepening those relationships. And then with the State Department, as I said, we're under Chief of Mission Authority overseas. So every day we're in and out of each other's offices with state colleagues working. I traditionally work most closely with the econ team, but also public affairs is imperative, getting out the right messaging, both on behalf of specific companies, but also on geostrategic interests. And so, again, just going back to the network, the relationships and communication is just so important. We can't succeed unless we have really strong interagency collaboration. You cannot. And I think as the world gets more complicated with supply chain disruptions that we saw during COVID, and that might happen if tariffs come into play, these interagency relationships and the communication with our stakeholders overseas is going to be imperative to maintain national security interests.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Aileen. I'm gonna now move to some questions that I'm just now receiving through the chat. One is, and we'll start with Aileen, but it's going to be for all the panelists. It's a question on how frequent your respective departments put you on assignment, particularly overseas. So is it typically a 2 or 3 year posting? And then do you get agency in your follow-on assignment? Meaning, do you get to choose where you go next, or what's the criteria to go to your next job, and what does that look like? So Aileen, if you can kind of walk us through that from a commerce side, and then we'll go to Shannon for state, and then Pete for the defense.
Okay, so I'm smiling because bidding, as we call it, gets harder as you rise through the ranks. It's something that's never easy. It's like moving. Moving never gets easier because it's typically as you get older, and certainly if you have a family, you just get more stuff and it gets more painful. but you know what to do, right? So it's never, you know, going to there are a lot of things that aren't easy, but you know what to do. So basically, we are rotated every 3 or 4 years. They just changed our policy to have only 3-year assignments. And what happens is that you get a list of assignments and you have to, you know, bid so many at grade, and, you know, there's a kind of a formula. And then there's a committee, I call it a secret committee, but people know who's on it, that makes the assignment for you. And so our process is very different from state. We don't typically lobby or interview for the jobs. So sometimes it can seem a little less transparent on who gets selected. But essentially most of our career is spent overseas. We have to do a mandatory domestic assignment at the beginning. Well, before you get to the FS1 level, which is like a GS-15, you have to do 1 domestic assignment. And then at the senior level, like the position I was just in DC, I was basically pulled back because they're like, you know, we need you back in headquarters. So needs of the service always reigns supreme, you know, and I had grandiose thoughts of going elsewhere. But it was good to be back in the US on a personal basis for 2 years. So I think you can make any assignment work for you, and there's something to learn in every job that you have. And again, that applies to everything you do throughout your career. So I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you, Eileen. Very insightful from the Commerce. How about Shannon in the State Department?
Sure. So in the State Department, it's really broken up into your entry-level assignments and then mid-level and on. So for entry level, because you're untenured and there are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to be considered for tenure, including a consular tour and a language, it's very often that your first 2 assignments are overseas. And for the most part, they are directed. You can present a list that sort of gives your priorities and where you would like to go. But at the end of the day, it's sort of up to the entry-level career development officers who are making those assignments. And the list every year for those assignments will change. You know, like as you can imagine, at one, you know, there's a lot of interest in sending people to China right now. And so it can really just vary sort of on where the needs of the positions are. Again, we're looking at a lot of consular jobs, but increasingly the department is trying to give opportunities for people to work in Cone during one of their first 2 assignments. So in my example, I was first tour officer in Ho Chi Minh City. My job was a consular job. I was on the visa line for non-immigrant visas, primarily, lots of fiancé visas. And, but I was able to do a 6-month informal rotation in our public diplomacy section. So that type of thing is very common. Once you're off tenure, though, and once you're sort of in the system, then you are, as Eileen pointed out, bidding for your onward assignment. I think in one difference I heard her speak to, which I thought was really interesting, is in our case, the positions are bureau owned. So EAP, which is our East Asia and Pacific Bureau, has its handle on the positions out in the region, and then every other bureau as well. And so it's really important that you know who those decision makers are, because you are essentially interviewing for your onward assignment. In my case, you know, it is complicated, and the department is really trying to make sure that everybody is treated equally. So there's a lot of emphasis right now on making sure that people have the opportunity to interview. But as a hiring manager, you know, if you are in a post, you know, where people are interested in going, that could be 20 or 30 people at a time. So there's a balancing act there. I think the other consideration for State Department folks is, you know, many tours are 3 years. Some are 2, depending on the level of hardship. Some are 1 year. Those 1-year assignments tend to be a place where family members cannot go. And so, you know, you're having to make considerations, you know, like where would your family go while you were doing that 1-year assignment? But for the most part, families accompany officers. And so schooling considerations might be a factor. Healthcare situations might be a factor. So you really have to do your own research. prior to expressing interest in a particular position overseas. Because in addition to, the grade of the position, the cone of the position, where it is in your own career path, you want to make sure that it's a good fit for your family or any other personal considerations you might have. And then the one thing, and there is a sort of a roadmap out there, it's called the Professional Development Plan. And it sort of lays out from tenure to, making it into the senior foreign service. You have to have done a certain number of tours in a high hardship post. You have to have language proficiency in a language. And there's other things that you need to make sure that you're tracking so that by the time you are ready to, as we call it, open your window into the senior foreign service, you have met all of those requirements over the course of your time. I think one other consideration just to throw out there is, in addition to assignments, it's promotion. We do move up. It's an up or out system. So after tenure, you have a certain number of years to make it from an 03 to an 02 or an 02 to an 01. And you just want to make sure that you're keeping those timelines in mind as well. So you're setting yourself up for your best situation for promotion so you don't find yourself not being able to move up and then having to move out. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to you, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. That's great. And I don't know how you got to go to Vietnam, Hanoi as your next job, but whether that was directed or part of the bidding, but you'll love it. I did 2 years there. It's fascinating.
No,
Okay.
it was I'm in the bidding phase. I mean, I like Aileen. It's all bidding now. But I think because the department does really want to make sure that those high hardship posts get filled, that they even are able to offer like early handshakes for some positions too. So that's just an extra incentive at a place like Vietnam that they're able to offer. So.
Oh, okay, great. And I'd like to now pass it to Pete to comment on all of this that we just talked about, the assignments, the durations, and how all that works out from assignment to assignment from a FAO perspective.
No, absolutely. First of all, it's fascinating. It always has been fascinating to me to hear my state colleagues talk about their bidding. Their bidding, they have certain words they use during this bidding, and it seems like it's evolved even since I've been in as a FAO, listening to their sidebar conversations about
Some
bidding.
aren't suitable for public consumption. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, but all those terms like handshake and winks and air kisses and that are these kind of preliminary agreements before they take a job, and it's fascinating. So for the foreign area officer, it's controlled by the different services. The Army FAO branch will control those assignments, SAF-IA, the Air Force, and so forth. And really, when you first go in, you get that degree, you get that language training, you get the in-country training, and you get an assignment at some point. And you head off to your first assignment. For the Army FAO, it's once you've switched over to FAO, that's your job the rest of your career. The Air Force has just gone to that. And it was just recently, I think it was 2022, that they finally went to single track, is what we call that. When I was serving, the idea was you would go back and forth between a FAO assignment and so-called the real Air Force, the big Air Force or whatever. But that's changed now. And even when I served, I got away with not really going back. I did all FAO assignments after I became one. So that's kind of how it is. And the different services are a little different. The Marines, I think, are still dual track, and the Navy is single track. So it's all different depending on the service. The different types of assignments, I went into that already, that you have a policy assignment or security cooperation at the embassy or an attaché job, and you can kind of bounce around in those. And as far as what you go into first, you would think it's always going to be security cooperation or an attaché job, but you can actually end up in the Pentagon as your first job. That can happen. I don't think it's the best approach. I think you should get out there in country and do it that way, and then come back to those jobs. I will say a little bit about real quickly. I think it's a good place to put in what an SDO-DAT is and what attachés are. So an SDO-DAT is a concept that came in, I think, 2008 or 2009 officially. There used to be, you could say, a colonel in charge of security cooperation and maybe a colonel in charge of the attaché team and they had different chains of command, and it wasn't always, if you had personalities, just like any other job in life that didn't get along, you can imagine where that could go. So they finally said, hey, look, we're going to name one or the other the senior defense official in that. So they are the senior defense official for anyone that's connected to the embassy that is wearing a uniform. Whether you're an attaché or security cooperation, or there's other things you could do as well. So that's kind of the SDO-DAT position, and really for a FAO, that is you want to be, you're kind of working your way up to be an SDO-DAT if you can. So that's kind of where I would leave it, Matt, I think.
Oh, that's great, Pete. And I completely agree in that well, the FAO, the Joint Service FAO should strive to get on that U.S. country team, the embassy experience as quickly as they can, because that's the experience that the combatant commander or the service chief is relying on the FAO to bring. How does a country team tick, or what's the relationship like with the ambassador? Only the FAO that has that experience can relay that to the military commander, and provide that advice. So those types of jobs are critically important. But yeah, thank you again for commenting on the senior defense official concept. It is very new, and within the last, since, I think you're right, since 2008. So I think it's gone swimmingly since, and it's kind of focused, who's actually, from a military side, who's in charge at the embassy, and there's no question on the military chain of command. But to Eileen's point, she's mentioned it a few times now, that they fall under Chief of Mission Authority, which is the ambassador. That's everyone at the embassy, to include the military, right? So if I were to go, I'm going to go be the senior defense official to Sri Lanka, and my boss will be the ambassador in Sri Lanka, the U.S. ambassador. While the ambassador comes from the Department of State, whether they are a career diplomat or a political appointee, they are nominated through the State Department. But anyone that goes to an embassy works for that. That's their number one boss. So that's a key thing to highlight. I have another question here, and we'll stick with Pete on this one. And then I would like to also get Shannon and Eileen's take on it. It's an interesting one. How do you foresee the military and diplomatic relationships with allies changing under the incoming Trump administration? So, if you feel comfortable answering that one, it's kind of like, gray area. We don't know until he's in the office. But what are your thoughts, Pete?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, no matter who the president is, allies and partners are critically important. So, and really everyone on this call, all of us, that's what we're in the business doing, no matter what department or agency we represent here. So you know, who knows what at this point, what the actual priority is going to be, but we're really talking about kind of the ways and means that we do the dime here today. And I think that no matter what, you're still going to be using those resources, which are the folks that do these types of jobs, no matter what department or agency we're from.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Shannon, do you have any comments on that specific question?
Sure, I would just add that, especially here in the region, people to people partnerships are so important. So while I suspect nothing will change in terms of our relationship with allies and those connections there, the underlying sort of gritting of it all happens not on a government to government basis, but just on a people to people one every day. And, I think you've got students going, both ways. You have other exchange opportunities happening all the time. And those are just like the tip of the iceberg, the ones we're aware of at an embassy. But those things happen even without government involvement all the time. And I think that's really the strength of sort of this region and where we're at right now. So that gives me hope for the future as well.
Yeah, I agree. People to people ties are critically important. And uh, it- I don't know who it was, and I might steal the quote, but you can't surge trust. So you really have to have that trust in place with your partners, and it be it be a thriving relationship. Because when you find yourself in a humanitarian disaster situation, or contingency, or something, another pandemic, you would, that's our job, is to make sure we have that trust built, that rapport, that relationship built with the host nation. That's our number one, in my opinion, number one job when we're out forward representing the United States, so that when we're needed, when we're when we have to answer the call, we're prepared to do so. Um, you can't do it alone. That's what I've realized, and come to appreciate, and that's one of our strengths, is our network of partners and allies globally. But thank you, Shannon. And how about Eileen? Do you have any comment on that question?
So in terms of the Asia region, I would just say that the Indo-Pacific strategy did not differ dramatically from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. So there's a recognition that this region is very important to counter third country aggression in the neighborhood here. So again, we don't know what we don't know. And, on the commercial side, I think a lot of companies are nervous about tariffs. Other companies see that as an opportunity. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But I think at least in the Indo-Pacific region, I would expect it to remain a priority.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And we do have other questions in the chat, but we are coming up on our time. So I'm going to now transition to closing remarks. So thank you once again to our distinguished panelists for sharing their expertise, and to all of you attending tonight's webinar. We hope you've gained valuable insights into U.S. government diplomatic career fields, and the essential interagency collaboration supporting our Indo-Pacific efforts. What I will ask is you please visit the East-West Center's website to explore upcoming events and resources. There's a lot of really good information coming out of the East-West Center all the time, whether it be articles or more webinars or in-person events. It's really a fantastic resource to everyone, whether you're just starting off on your career in the Indo-Pacific space or are a seasoned practitioner. They very much are the heartbeat of what's going on in the region. With that, we look forward to seeing you again soon, and hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.